Thank you all very much. I so appreciate that. I have to admit, coming into this room, having been a student at this law school, coming into this room gives me the jitters. In fact, walking into the building reminds me of all the challenges of being a student at this institution, but it is a great institution, and thank you all for coming here for this great event. Thank you, David, for that introduction and invitation. And of course to Northwestern for hosting this conference. You know, when I first took office as governor, I was intent on working with the General Assembly to pass a first-in-the-nation equity-centric law, making Illinois the national standard for cannabis legalization and regulation. There had been states before us that had done it, but all had done it by referendum. And I knew that it would require us to disentangle not just the convoluted and ineffective laws that were on our books at the time, but the lingering biases and misconceptions that put those laws on our books in the first place. So that was no simple task, as you can imagine, because when you do it in other states by referenda, then the legislature gets to work and decides, and the executive branch decides what the regulations are, and they have to do it quickly because, of course, the public is demanding, they just voted for it. They want this in place as soon as possible. Well, here in Illinois, we were guided by a simple goal, which is a safe, equitable, and prosperous cannabis industry, because for all the challenges that cannabis legalization required us to face, it presented even more opportunity. And it was opportunity to rectify the failures of our past while also building something better for our future. During my first 4 months in office, I worked closely with the General Assembly, with legal experts, and community advocates to do just that, to draft and enact the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. This landmark new law was carefully crafted to accomplish a model of what common sense, equity-forward cannabis policy can look like. And again, we had seen the other states and the direction they had gone, and they had failed to, in my view, get it right, and they were kind of trying to play catch-up afterward. And so we wanted to start from the very beginning, trying to get it right from the very beginning. As you know, in government, sometimes you start out with good intentions, and there are challenges that you face, but always if you kind of press, sempre avanti, ever forward toward the goal, we'll get there. So we started with the necessary first step of repairing the harms created by the previous legal regime. And that meant clearing cannabis-related records of nonviolent, low-level offenders, and doing that with automatic expungement and with gubernatorial pardons and individual court actions. I remember a meeting specifically with a bipartisan group of legislators. There weren't that many that on the other side of the aisle from me who voted for it, but there were some that were real advocates for getting an equity-centric piece of cannabis legalization legislation passed. But I remember sitting with a group of them who were really well-intended. And when we got to this subject of expungement and trying to right the wrongs of the past, and I said, well, why don't we do something in legislation that would just do a broad automatic expungement? And the response from across the table was, oh, no, we don't want to be responsible for that. We want you to take all the heat for that. And so there was some conversation about that, but in the end, it was, I basically said, okay, well, I'll be the person who's issuing pardons and who's, putting expungement forward and making sure that we're doing it in the agency processes of state government as opposed to writing it right into the law. So we started, by focusing on how to right those wrongs, and that meant going after the 800,000 arrest records and convictions. And that's, by the way, what we did. In total, we cleared over 800,000 arrest records and convictions. And that, as you know, opened the doors for hundreds of thousands of Illinoisans to erase records that had held many of them back from getting jobs and obtaining housing. You hear a lot about, ban the box. You've heard that over the years. This was one of those things where, if you had to admit to on a form that you'd been arrested or convicted of anything, right, and this would be a low-level conviction, or arrest, that it really did affect people's lives in a terribly negative way. And so this was one way to make sure that you're giving people a real opportunity to succeed in life. But it wasn't just enough to clear people's records. The war on cannabis had done tremendous untold damage to families and to neighborhoods across the state, particularly in communities of color. So we created a fund that was focused on restorative justice called Restore, Reinvest, and Renew. We call it R3, that takes revenue generated from the cannabis industry and it puts it back into communities that were most harmed. Cannabis sales in Illinois today have provided hundreds of millions of dollars already for community organizations who are doing the work of rebuilding communities that were torn apart by the ill-conceived war on drugs, with grants to civil legal aid organizations, to economic development organizations, a reentry from the criminal justice system, addressing those challenges, violence prevention, which is so badly needed and had been severely defunded before I became governor, and youth development, just broadly making sure we're providing jobs and opportunity for kids who might otherwise not get it. Yeah. And although I don't want to go through every piece of this legislation, which was, crafted finely by a lot of great people, because it would take me too long, but I'll just say the final really big plank of the cannabis plan was something particularly novel that I believe will help define the legacy of this law and set a national standard for the cannabis industry, and that's the Cannabis Social Equity Program. We knew that, like in other states that had legalized before us, that we were setting up a multi-billion-dollar industry. That never existed before. And unlike in other states, though, we wanted to make sure those who had been historically disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs substantially benefited from the wealth that would be created by this new cannabis industry. That is something that did not happen again, because of the speed with which many other states had to move. I think there was intent by many of those folks to try to make that happen, but they just couldn't finally craft the legislation in the way that I think we had. And I want to remind you and give credit where credit is due. There were some legislators in our General Assembly here who had been working on this for a few years before I ever got to be governor of the state. They didn't have a governor who would work with them on it. And so when I got there was already a movement and some real experts in the General Assembly. And I, in some ways, was the beneficiary of their great work. And then, we had to, take it over the finish line once I took office. But, the Cannabis Social Equity Program provides licenses, it provides low-interest loans, it provides training programs and other resources to cannabis entrepreneurs who might not have otherwise had a chance at success. They may not have ever started a business before, they may not have been, certainly not in this industry, and this is a complex industry. There's a lot of security that you have to put in place. You've got to make sure you've got the right location, you've got to fill out a whole lot of regulatory forms, and then make sure you're following it along the way. And there were some people who just didn't have that expertise on their own, but who nevertheless deserved an opportunity to become small business people. Indeed, if you got a license and you could open your doors, you're probably becoming a millionaire. And that's, a big change for people that this program was designed to address. So in just a few short years, we made tremendous progress. And we stumbled and made some mistakes along the way, but not intentionally. Just, it's hard to get this done in the right way. And of course, we launched the program. I just want to remind you, there was a medical cannabis program before we had our adult use program and recreational. And some of the negotiation was, hey, we should allow the medical owners to be able to open an adult use recreational dispensary first, because they already have the expertise. They're ready to go. They just need to have more space where they are, or maybe another location, but they had the expertise. The challenge of that was every medical dispensary was owned by a person who wasn't a person of color, and there were no women owners, as far as I remember. And so here you're allowing people to go into business first who aren't the target of what I consider to be a very important part of the purpose for legalization. So, but we had to address that. It took us some time to get that right as we were issuing the licenses. But let me tell you where we are today. Well, a study was published, an independent study that the state paid for an independent agency to do, not part of the government, and we needed it, a disparity study, so we knew how far along really are we in this process. And that came out just 2 weeks ago, and I have to tell you, I honestly didn't know how far we had come. I mean, I could guess, but I just didn't know. And so when I saw this pop up in my email inbox that, oh, here's the study, I was honestly trepidatious about clicking on it, because maybe I'm going to find out we have 5 more years of work to get where we want to be, or we're nowhere close or something. But here are the results. Between January 1, 2020, which is the date we legalized, and January 31 of 2023, so that's 3 years and a month, 59% of adult use dispensary licenses were issued to minority or women-owned businesses. And most of those people went into business. I mean, there's some that we had about 100 licenses that hadn't been utilized yet because people couldn't find the capital. Remember, this is all during a period where interest rates are going up and up and up. And if you're starting a business and you need to borrow money, it was a very difficult period for people to do it in. So that's really a tremendous result. Minority and women-owned businesses held 63% of craft grower licenses, 61% of infuser licenses, 74% of transporter licenses, and then lastly, about 84% of our direct forgivable loans went to minority and women-owned cannabis businesses. So of course, I was very interested. I'm a competitive sort, and I want Illinois to win always. And so I asked that we compare it to all the other states, and they did that in the study for us. So that's great. It turns out Illinois, with all of those licenses and dispensaries and infusers and so on, 60% minority and women-owned for Illinois. The next state next to us, second, was Maryland at 37%. So we're at 60, they're at 37, and down from there to smaller numbers. Great for them, better for us, but like I said, I'm a competitive sort. Love Maryland and Governor Moore, love Illinois more. I really am incredibly proud of the progress that we've made. It hasn't been easy. We have more work to do, there's no doubt. I'm not satisfied with where we are. We have a long way to go to repair the damage of the war on drugs that was unleashed on so many communities. And I'm really hopeful that the cannabis industry will continue to bring opportunity and wealth to communities of color for decades to come. That's going to take work, and we all have to be attentive to it. And I believe that we have a General Assembly and an administration that is going to stay on it every day. We have an actual agency that we created that does this every day, focuses on it, and our great leader of that agency is here, and I thank her for the work that she's done. Yeah, a crew has been, just outstanding. So we are in process, so stay tuned about all the progress that's yet to come. But our success ought to inspire other states, maybe other countries, to pursue their own cannabis equity agenda. Perhaps even bringing it to the federal level in the United States. Sometimes, yeah. Now, I want you to know, and I do believe we ought to do this on a federal level, but every day that goes by that hasn't been done on the federal level, benefits the taxpayers of the state of Illinois, because as it turns out, and I hear these things, that people from Indiana, people from Iowa, people from Wisconsin, Kentucky drive across the border and buy something at a dispensary in Illinois. Now, they're not supposed to drive back over the border into their states with it, so I assume they're just staying in Illinois. But you can tell when you look at the sales tax numbers and the cannabis revenue that's coming to the state of Illinois, that it's about 20 to 25% of all of the revenue that we get in the state, and that's at the state level and the local level, comes from people who come from out of state, sort of cannabis tourists, if you will. So I'm pleased about that, but I do believe that equity demands that we go at this at the federal level and do it the way that Illinois has done it. And apparently I'm done. I'm not, yeah. It's the first time I've been sent off stage like that. Thank you all really for being here, for the work that you do, for committing yourselves to a modern, innovative, and equitable cannabis industry, and enjoy the rest of the conference today.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Of course.